I should have known something was wrong when I found the invitation tucked inside my screen door that Halloween morning. Not taped to it, inside it, pressed between the mesh and the frame like someone had phased it through the metal itself. The envelope was black, sealed with red wax that looked disturbingly fresh. My name, Ethan Morse, was written in handwriting so precise it could have been printed, except for the slight tremor in each letter, like whoever wrote it had been shaking. I lived alone in Vestal Pines, Oregon, a town so small it didn't even have a zip code of its own. We borrowed one from the next county over. The house I'd inherited from my uncle sat at the end of RIDGECREST Lane, where the paved road gave way to dirt and gravel, and the forest pressed in so close you could hear the trees breathing at night. You are cordially invited to the Halloween gathering in the Hollow. Midnight. Come alone. Come willing. You've been chosen. I almost threw it away. I should have thrown it away. But there was something about that word, chosen, that hooked into my brain and wouldn't let go. In a town of 200 people where nothing ever happened, where the same families had lived for generations and everyone knew everyone else's business, being chosen for something felt significant. That evening, I asked around. Martha at the general store had never heard of any Halloween gathering. Deputy Kern looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Even old Theodore Vance, who'd lived in Vestal Pines for 83 years and knew every story, every legend, every forgotten piece of local history, just shook his head slowly when I mentioned the Hollow. "There ain't no hollow behind RIDGECREST," he said, his cloudy eyes fixed on something past my shoulder. "Not anymore." The way he said "anymore" made my skin crawl. By 11:30 that night, I'd convinced myself I wasn't going. I'd poured myself a bourbon, turned on a horror movie, something appropriately campy for Halloween, and settled into my uncle's old recliner. But at 11:47 I found myself pulling on my jacket. At 11:52 I was out the door. At 11:58 I was standing at the edge of my property where the forest began, holding a flashlight that suddenly seemed painfully inadequate. I didn't know where this hollow was supposed to be, but my feet seemed to know. They carried me past the tree line, through underbrush that should have been thicker, along a path that shouldn't have existed. The October air bit at my face, and fog rolled between the trees like something alive and searching. That's when I heard the music. It was old-timey, the kind of thing you'd hear crackling from a phonograph, a waltz maybe, or something close to it. But there was something off about the melody, notes that bent in wrong directions, rhythms that stuttered and lurched. Following that music felt like walking toward my own funeral, but I couldn't stop. The hollow opened up before me like a wound in the earth. It was a perfect circle, maybe 50 yards across, sunk 20 feet below the surrounding forest floor. The trees around its rim leaned inward at unnatural angles, their branches reaching toward the center like grasping fingers. In the depression below, I could see candles, hundreds of them, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And people, maybe 30 people, all dressed in clothes from different eras. Victorian dresses next to 1920s suits, next to pioneer bonnets, next to nothing I could identify. They were dancing. Not together, not exactly. Each person moved in their own circle, swaying and spinning to that horrible music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Their faces were blank, eyes open but seeing nothing, mouths moving in silent words. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and never look back. But then I saw her. She stood at the far edge of the hollow, the only one not dancing. She was dressed in modern clothes, jeans and a red jacket. And she was looking right at me with eyes that were completely, utterly aware. "Help me," she mouthed. I recognized her. Claire Dennison. She disappeared 3 years ago. Just walked out of her house one October evening and never came back. The search had gone on for months. They'd dragged the reservoir, combed every inch of forest, interviewed everyone in 3 counties. Nothing. And here she was. I scrambled down into the hollow, my flashlight beam scattering across the dancers who didn't react, didn't even blink. Claire backed away as I approached, shaking her head frantically. "Don't touch me," she whispered. "If you touch me, you'll..." The music stopped. All at once, every dancer froze mid-step. 30 heads turned toward me with the synchronized precision of a flock of starlings. In the sudden silence, I could hear them breathing. Quick, shallow gasps that weren't quite human. "You came willing," they said in unison, their voices layering over each other in a dissonant chorus. "You were chosen." Claire grabbed my arm. I felt her cold fingers close around my wrist. and suddenly I understood. The dancers weren't people anymore, not really. They were echoes, impressions left behind by everyone who'd accepted the invitation over the decades, maybe over centuries. They'd come to the hollow seeking something, mystery, excitement, belonging, and they'd been absorbed into whatever ancient thing lived in this depression in the earth. "Run!" Claire screamed. I yanked my arm free and bolted. Behind me, the music started again. Louder now, more frenzied. I heard footsteps, too many footsteps, and that awful synchronized breathing growing closer. The path I'd followed in had vanished, and I crashed through undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes and face. I burst out of the forest into my backyard just as the church bells in town struck 1 a.m. My lungs burned, my legs shook, and when I looked back at the tree line, I saw them. The dancers stood just inside the forest, swaying slightly, their faces still blank. Watching. Waiting. Claire wasn't with them. I haven't left my house after dark in the 3 weeks since Halloween. I board up the windows every night and keep every light on until dawn. Sometimes I hear that music drifting through the walls, and sometimes I see figures standing in my yard, perfectly still, dressed in clothes from different times. Yesterday, I found another envelope inside my screen door. Same black paper, same red wax seal. "You came once but didn't stay. You touched what was ours but didn't pay. The invitation stands, Ethan Morse. Next October, you won't have a choice. I'm writing this down in case I disappear. In case next Halloween, I walk into those woods and don't come back. Because I can feel it already. A pull like hooks under my skin, drawing me towards something I don't understand. The worst part? Sometimes late at night, I find myself humming that melody, and my feet start moving in small circles, practicing steps to a dance I never learned. The smell hit me first. That sweet, cloying reek of vegetation gone bad, of nature eating itself from the inside out. I'd moved to Ashwell Station, Nebraska, because my therapist thought the quiet would help with my anxiety. She didn't know that. Silence has a sound all its own, and that sound can drive you crazier than any city noise. The town was barely a town, just a grain elevator, a post office that doubled as a general store, and maybe 40 houses scattered across farmland that stretched to the horizon in every direction. My rental was an old farmhouse 2 miles outside, what passed for downtown, surrounded by fields that had gone to seed decades ago. The realtor, a nervous woman named Paula Greist, had been almost apologetic when showing me around. "It's the Hollins place," she'd said, like that should mean something. "Been empty for 5 years now. Family just left." I should have asked why. I should have asked a lot of things. It was October 28th when I found the pumpkin patch. I'd been exploring the property, walking the perimeter of my rented land, when I discovered it hidden behind the collapsed remains of an old barn. Dozens of pumpkins, maybe 100, growing wild in perfectly straight rows. That alone was odd. Pumpkins that organize don't grow naturally, but what made my skin prickle was their condition. They were rotting. All of them. But not the way produce normally rots. These pumpkins were decaying from the inside out, their faces, and yes, they all had faces, carved with incredible detail, collapsing inward while their skins remained intact. The faces weren't jack-o'-lantern triangles and toothy grins. They were realistic, anguished, screaming, and they were fresh. The cuts in the rinds were clean, maybe a day old at most. I lived alone. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. There was no one to carve these pumpkins but me, and I sure as hell hadn't done it. That night, I heard scratching at my bedroom window. Soft at first, then more insistent. Fingernails on glass, deliberate and patient. When I worked up the courage to look, there was nothing there. Just my own reflection in the dark window, pale and frightened, and behind me, movement. In the mirror, I could see them. The pumpkins. They were closer to the house now, arranged in a semicircle on my lawn. All those tortured faces turned toward my window. But when I spun around to look directly, the lawn was empty. October 29th. I tried to leave. My car wouldn't start. The battery was fine, tank full of gas, but the engine just clicked uselessly. Paula wouldn't answer my calls. Neither would the sheriff's office. My cell phone had signal, 3 full bars, But every call I made simply rang. Forever. No voicemail, no answer. Just infinite ringing that sounded increasingly hollow. I walked to the Grist Realty office in town. It was closed, windows dark, but I could see Paula sitting at her desk inside, staring at her computer screen with absolute stillness. I pounded on the door. She didn't move, didn't even blink. The post office was the same. Harriet Chen frozen behind the counter, hand suspended mid-reach toward a package. The grain elevator stood silent. No workers, no sound of machinery, just the wind whistling through the aging metal structure. Everyone in Ashwell Station had stopped. Everyone except me. When I ran back to my house, the pumpkin patch had tripled in size. They covered my entire front yard now, those rotting faces all turned toward my door. And I could hear them. A whisper. Thousands of whispers overlapping and echoing. Join us, join us, join us. That night, October 30th, I learned the truth. I found the journal in the basement, tucked behind the water heater where the previous tenant had hidden it. Marcus Hollins had written it. Dated entries spanning 3 years, growing increasingly erratic. October 15th, 2018. The pumpkins appeared overnight. Sarah thinks I planted them as a Halloween surprise. I didn't. They're growing so fast. Impossibly fast. October 22nd, 2018. Carved the first one today. Didn't mean to. I woke up in the patch. Knife in my hand. Pumpkin grinning up at me with a face that looked like my father. Dad's been dead for 10 years. October 28th, 2018. They have everyone's faces now. Everyone who ever lived in this house. Great-grandfather Jeremiah, who built this place in 1887. Grandmother Ruth. Uncle Peter, who died in the war. All of them, carved in rotting pumpkin flesh, whispering their stories through decomposing mouths. October 30th, 2018. I understand now. The land remembers. Every drop of blood soaked into this soil, every body buried in these fields, every life that ended here. The land remembers and it gives them back. But they come back wrong. They come back hollow. Tonight is Halloween Eve. The night when the rot becomes contagious. If I'm still here at midnight, I'll become one of them. I'm taking my family. We're leaving everything. If you're reading this, run. The entry ended there. I looked at my watch, 11:17 p.m. The whispers had become words now, clear and distinct. They were telling me stories, the history of this land, of the Lakota who died here during the expansion west, of the homesteaders who'd starved in the brutal winter of 1888, of the farm, workers who'd been caught in the machinery over the decades, of the children who'd drowned in the irrigation ditches. The land was full of death, and on Halloween Eve, that death wanted company. At 11:43 p.m. I tried to run, made it to the end of my driveway before my legs stopped working. Not cramps, not fatigue. They simply stopped obeying my brain. I collapsed onto the gravel and watched in horror as my hands began moving on their own, fingers twitching and flexing. The pumpkins were rolling toward me now, tumbling across the ground with wet, squelching sounds. Those rotting faces loomed closer, and I could see the truth in their carved features. These weren't decorations. These were prisons. Souls bound to rotting vegetables, trapped in decomposing flesh, aware and suffering and desperately trying to escape. At 11:58 p.m., I felt the knife in my hand. I don't know where it came from. My arm raised itself, the blade catching moonlight, and I realized with absolute clarity what was about to happen. I was going to carve my own face. I was going to hollow myself out and join them. At 11:59 p.m., I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking. I told the land everything, every fear, every regret, every moment of pain I'd ever experienced. My anxiety, my loneliness, my desperation to escape the noise of the world. I poured it all out, words tumbling over themselves, confessing to the earth beneath me. And I apologized. I apologized for every person who'd ever taken from this land without giving back, for every drop of blood spilled without remembrance, for the forgetting. At 12 a.m., the whispers stopped. The knife fell from my hand. My legs were my own again. The pumpkins remained, but they'd turned away, faces pointing back toward the fields. As I watched, they began to sink into the earth, pulled down by invisible hands until nothing remained but disturbed soil. The next morning, Paula Grist called me back. She sounded confused about why I'd called her so many times. The people in town moved and breathed and lived again, with no memory of standing frozen. My car started on the first try. I left Ashwell Station that afternoon and never went back. But every Halloween Eve, no matter where I am, I tell my stories to the ground beneath my feet. I remember the forgotten. I speak the names of those the land has swallowed. Because I learned something in that pumpkin patch that I'll never forget. The earth is always listening, and on Halloween, it expects to be heard. Sometimes late at night I can still smell that sweet rot, and I wonder how many people ignored the warnings. How many people are trapped right now in fields across the country, their souls bound to vegetables and earth, whispering stories no one hears. And I wonder what happens to the ones who never learn to listen back.